Thank you. I thought I'd finish our season off with something a little bit seasonal, wintry and cold and warm at the same time. And it also talks about a setting kind of similar to what we have here as well. It's called The Writer. He crouched before the fire, slowly piling heavy pieces of wood onto it. I shivered, sitting in a soft armchair next to the fireplace. We had met, as we often did on Monday nights, at the poetry reading at the Other Art Cafe. It was an unusual venue for a forestry town in northern British Columbia. On the wall were paintings in soft hues, photographs with stark contrasts of black and white, colorful weavings. Women wore long flowing black or tie-dyed skirts. Some men wore bright vests and multicolored shoes, while others dressed in drab sports jackets under their parkas. I loved the rich desserts like chocolate cheesecake, enjoyed with a frothy cappuccino. And on Monday nights, along with this visual and culinary feast, local artists read from their work, opening their hearts to those of us listening to their words fall like water on our own wandering thoughts. He was a published writer, but complained that it hadn't translated into financial success. He didn't read at the cafe, but listened to the other writers and applauded at the right moments. Sometimes I saw him struggling for conversation, but when I would gather him up in a deeper subject, we could talk for hours. That night, he asked me to leave with him. Maybe it was the freezing cold. A month of 40 below had chilled me. I'd moved from the inside of one place to the inside of another, trying not to breathe the sharp cold air into my startled lungs for the few moments needed to go from my shuddering car into another building. I wanted warmth, and I liked him, despite his sometimes prickly manner and his lack of a car or a job. He said he didn't need a regular job. He was happy to work when he wanted, sleep when he wanted, or sit and look at the moon. He didn't need a car either. He could walk anywhere in our small community. So I drove. He stoked up the fire and put on the kettle for tea. His house was simple and clean. There were 2 large bedrooms, one with papers stacked everywhere around a single desk and an Underwood typewriter. He emerged from there with a book of poetry that he'd self-published. Some of it wasn't bad. He asked to see some of my writing. I was nervous. My recent writing was terribly personal, but he encouraged me, and so I unfolded 2 sheets of paper from my purse and held them out to him. He read slowly while I watched his face, but it was blank. He said he didn't understand. So I explained. I told him about the disaster that was then my life. He encouraged me and offered advice that seemed sound. He said I needed to find someone different, someone certainly nothing like him. I couldn't seem to get warm, although I drew as close to the fire as I dared, but I stayed for a long time as we talked. His eyes were warm and attentive. The flickering light from the fire fell on his face caressingly. Then I noticed the time and drew myself up to leave. He held my long wool coat out to me, sliding it over my arms and around me. My voice caught in my throat. He reached inside the weight of my coat and held me. I tentatively returned the hug. We stood together, swaying, until I laid my head on his shoulder. He lifted my face to his and kissed me. He felt surprisingly soft and gentle. He held me in his arms for a long, sweet time. I returned to my icy vehicle, finally warm and happy.